Welcome to the Tesla Economist. Please hit the thumbs up and remember to subscribe. You can also follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon. We often think that if and when this new EV tax credit comes into play, then demand for all EVs will spike. But then I was thinking, well, actually, most of them already have a $7,500 tax credit already, like the Mustang Mach-E. Yet there is no waiting list for the Mach-E. You can buy one from dealers right now, right out of the showroom. Obviously after a painful process that people dread. I mean, other than Tesla and GM, all EVs in the US still offer a $7,500 tax credit. That is a huge discount on a car. But I was just talking to a Ford car dealership, and they're currently adding around $10,000 extra markup on the price of Mach-E's. This is due to the shortage in cars that they're currently facing. In other words, when demand exceeds supply, car dealers have no problem profiteering and raising the prices. Now, the reason for the tax credit is so that legacy autos can raise the prices of their EVs enough to cover their costs, while stimulating demand, with a price supposedly closer to their ICE equivalent. So they'll no longer be selling each EV at a loss, and possibly even make some profit to cover some of the enormous capital expenditure they're investing into their EV transition. So legacy autos will try and absorb some of this tax credit, supposedly meant for the consumer, to help contribute to their costs. But if demand for these products rise too much, then it would seem that the car dealers seem to have no problem adding an enormous amount of markup on them, especially considering their ICE sales are down so much. One way or another, these car dealerships still need to make profit somehow, or they go under. If they can't make any profit from ICE vehicles due to declining sales, then they'll have to add huge markup onto the vehicles that are in demand, which will likely be their EVs. It's all very well the government telling citizens that they're going to get so much money back in tax when you buy an EV, but it's kind of moot if the prices go up accordingly anyway. The car dealerships sound like they'll squeeze every dollar out of what the auto manufacturers leave them. Of course, Tesla would also be benefiting from a tax credit, although perhaps one that is not quite as generous. But right now, for example, the Ford Mustang Mach-E is competing against the Model Y with a $7,500 advantage, and still selling them at a huge loss, compared to Tesla selling the Model Y for less, with better features and specifications, and managing close to a 30% margin. Now, sales and pricing has to do with supply and demand. There may be some demand for these legacy auto EVs, like the F-150 Lightning, but we're hearing that Ford will only manage to produce 15,000 of those in 2022, if they're lucky. Yet they have pre-orders of 120,000. It would be safe to assume that the demand will be greater than 15,000 for Lightning pickup trucks in the first year. Demand will be higher than supply. Even if Ford kept their $53,000 suggested retail price tag, then any dealers that sell them will charge well above $60,000 for them. Of course, the customer then gets the $12,500 tax credit. But the $53,000 standard Lightning XLT has a range of only about 230 miles, which the average American will not find acceptable, let alone the average American pickup truck driver, especially with a payload or a trailer. The extended range will likely cost an additional $10,000 to get to 300 miles. So we're now in the region of a $70,000 vehicle, or $57,500 after tax credits. Of course, this is for the standard version. If you want any of those fancy extras, then you'll have to pay for them. Features like the touch narrow screen. That's right, Ford went the opposite direction of a widescreen and chose a narrow screen. I'm guessing that advanced towing technology is an extra too. Then you might want some of the other features standard on a Tesla. Of course, you won't be able to get Tesla's level of self-driving. Well, not unless you ever drive on a road that ever has a bend on it, and never want to exit said road. Either way, to have a Lightning comparable with what's standard on a Cybertruck, you're going to be paying close to $80,000 before tax credits. Meanwhile, Tesla are offering a dual-motor Cybertruck for what will now be $40,000 with the tax credit, and that happens to have over 300 miles of range, with a widescreen as standard, along with the most advanced autopilot in any automobile. And given that the Cybertruck has more pre-orders than any other car in history, then there's a good chance that Tesla are not going to mess around when it comes to supply. Oh, and there are also no car deals you have to negotiate with and wear you down until you capitulate to them with their outrageous price tag. When you buy a Tesla, the price is what Tesla say it is, no haggling up or down. So right now, all these other EVs are competing against Tesla already with a $7,500 advantage, yet Tesla is still the one that has a waiting list until next year. except the Bolt of course, which has exhausted all its tax credit, but that car is in a special league of its own. The same will occur for any other auto legacy EV. The auto manufacturers do not have full control of the buying experience. It's left to independent car dealers, looking out for their own self-interest. Also, possibly very concerned that they're about to go out of business very soon, as they've noticed their ICE sales have been starting to drop a bit lately, even the ones they can't get their hands on due to chip shortages. Therefore, they need to milk every EV sale they can. As a result, it will also be difficult for legacy autos to raise their prices overly to generate any profit, which is somewhat the whole intention of the tax credit. But if they still manage to raise their prices by $5,000, then that would help with their costs. I believe, for example, the Volkswagen ID4 loses $4,000 to $5,000 per sale, so that would stop their losses. Oh, except they're not made in the US, so only benefit from $7,500, same as what they receive now, although they are planning on building them in the US soon. The Volkswagen ID4 sales seem to be even worse than the Mach-E's, with only 5,756 in Q2, and the ID4 starts as low as $32,500 after tax incentives. So I spoke to a Volkswagen dealer in California too, and it sounded like they had plenty sitting on the showrooms for you to buy today. Therefore, you have to wonder, how many of these sales are the dealers? And remember, these legacy autos are about to take on serious debt with their attempt to transition to electric, and will have an additional cost of around $30 to $50 billion of debt to contend with. Well, this is going to only add further into their already $15,000 or so headwind they face for every EV they sell when compared to Tesla. In other words, at best, for the consumer, this tax credit might mean that legacy autos cost the equivalent of where they are today, but could actually end up costing even more, due to new models being released that are in such limited supply that even the small amount of demand they do have, they still can't meet. But at the same time, it's tough to incentivize them if they lose money on every sale. But then also at the same time, governments are going to ban their ICE sales eventually too. This just feels like such an impossible situation to get out of. Meanwhile, Teslas are $10,000 less, and perhaps Texas will at least triple supply for the US, and more likely increase supply by 5 to 10 times by around 2024. The more Teslas people buy, the less legacy autos they're buying. Ford could only sell 3,000 Ford Mustang Mach-E's in July, with a $7,500 advantage over Tesla. What's going to happen when Tesla have a $10,000 advantage too? With the growing waiting list of the Model Y, whilst Tesla are equally increasing supply of the Model Y, it would appear that consumers are willing to wait for a Tesla, compared to buying a Mach-E or ID4 today. Imagine how much longer they're willing to wait when a Tesla becomes $10,000 cheaper. Or $20,000 cheaper with the standard range. And then with a Cybertruck too, most consumers accept that they have to wait a year or two for their Cybertruck. Do you think in the meantime they're going to buy a brand new car to cover them for that year or two? Not likely. It would be a colossal waste of money. Do you think they're going to buy an F-150 Lightning instead because they don't want to wait so long for their Cybertruck? Again, not only unlikely, but also probably an even longer waiting list due to their 15,000 production target for 2021. This is Ford's production target, which they will very likely fall short on too. Oh, but GM's tax credit will be valid again, and they will get $12,500 off of GM, except their new EV, well, that starts at over $112,000 and isn't applicable for any tax credit. But if the Chevrolet Bolt is still in production, then that may very well be applicable for a $12,500 tax credit, and they actually start at only $31,000, excluding any markup from your local ethical car dealer. When you subtract $12,500 from that, then you're left with only $18,500, plus all on-road associated costs, which is exceptionally cheap for any car, let alone an EV. Of course, it's up to the consumer whether they want to risk burning to death to save a bit of money. That car brand is tainted beyond recognition, and possibly the entire confidence in GM capable of making EVs. And they did decide to partner up again with LG for their Ultium platform, as it sounds like now they know what they're doing, and it only cost them a $2 billion recall to find out why. A Nissan Leaf is also made in the US and will be of a similar price for people who don't need as much range, comfort, performance, luxury, safety, features, entertainment or prestige. And it doesn't appear to hit many demographics given the fact Nissan didn't even sell 10,000 Leafs in 2020. Tesla sell that many every few days. To summarise, I'm not sure if this tax credit will even reduce the price of most EVs by a significant much. ironically other than a Tesla, and of the legacy auto EVs that consumers actually want, which may well indeed be the Lightning, well, Ford won't make enough to generate any decent sales. In the meantime, the Cybertruck will be making hundreds of thousands and ramping up at a rapid rate, and totally eating up the US pickup truck market share. I try to explore all the ways government can help save these legacy autos, especially in a way that won't benefit Tesla, other than outright saying all EV credits apply to every car except Tesla. But these companies can't be saved. They can only be kept alive by pouring massive, massive amounts of taxpayers' money into keeping the lights on. Similar to the economist John Maynard Keynes saying the government can just employ people to dig holes and then employ other people to fill them in, which has been highly discredited. It simply doesn't make economic sense. And it looks like the US legacy autos will be the ones to suffer the most. Thanks for listening. Please hit the thumbs up and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and talk to me on Patreon.